In this module, we'll take a look at the mode wheel, which sits on top of your camera just here. Now, of course, we use the mode wheel to jump between different modes and hopefully out of the automatic mode. Although the automatic mode is very clever. But in the auto mode, it's simply the camera that's doing all the work and making all those decisions. And that isn't very exciting, is it? So it's so much more fun when we have an input into making those decisions. So let's take a look at those important camera modes, the modes where we can adjust the 3 exposure elements. Let's take a look at some typical mode wheels. So here we have a Sony wheel, a Canon wheel, and a Nikon wheel. The modes where you can make a creative input are the P, A, S and M modes, and that's what we're going to take a look at. So they are the modes where you can jump in and make changes to any of those 3 exposure elements. So what do those acronyms stand for? Well, obviously the letter M stands for manual. Now in the manual mode, you control all 3 elements. But you will have the option on some cameras or most cameras to switch the ISO to automatic if you feel you need to. But I think if you're in full manual, it's nice to be in total control of all 3 elements, but it's entirely up to you. The next mode then is A or AV, which is Aperture Priority. Now in Aperture Priority, you only control the size of the aperture. So you just simply control the size of the hole in the lens, and the camera will read the light coming in, use a light meter, and it will select the shutter speed and the ISO to give you the perfect exposure. And it's fantastic, isn't it? Because that will release your creativity, because all you have to really think about is what aperture size to use. Now the acronyms are slightly different if you have a Canon camera, in that instead of the letter A for aperture, Canon has AV. Now it's exactly the same. AV stands for aperture value. So don't worry if you've got a Canon camera like this one and it actually says AV instead of A. It's exactly the same. The next mode we're going to look at then is S for shutter priority, or TV if you have a Canon. Now in shutter priority, you have full control of the shutter speed, and the camera will adjust the aperture size and the ISO to suit to make sure you get the perfect exposure. Now remember, if you've got a Canon camera, the acronym is TV for time value, but it's exactly the same as S for shutter speed. So they are the 3 modes that we're going to look at. Now in an earlier module, we looked at the exposure triangle for manual photography, and I showed you that when you are in manual mode, you are in control of those 3 elements. It's a lot of fun, manual photography, but it does take slightly longer to sort of get your camera set to capture a photograph. So let's take a look at an exposure triangle for aperture priority. So in aperture priority, you would simply select the acronym for aperture priority. That would be A or AV, depending if you've got a Canon camera. And you will be in full control of the aperture size. Now the camera will read how much light is coming into the camera, and it will adjust the shutter speed and the ISO for you. So essentially you just have a creative decision on what size aperture to use. Now we're going to do a whole section on aperture sizes, so by the end of that module you will know what size aperture to use. But all you need to know at the moment that is in aperture priority, you are in control of that aperture size, and the camera will select the other 2 exposure elements for you. So let's take a look at the exposure triangle for shutter priority. Simply select S for shutter, or TV if you have a Canon, and you will be in full control of the shutter speed. And the camera will read how much light is coming into the camera and adjust the aperture size and ISO to give you the perfect exposure. And again, what this does is releases you to be super creative with your shutter speed and sort of confident that the camera will select the correct aperture size and ISO to give you the perfect exposure. So they are the 3 modes that we're going to look at. So you can see how easy it is when you are in the priority modes, aperture priority or shutter priority, in that you only have to make one creative decision. And I think this is fantastic. For instance, you may decide to isolate a subject. Now, we would use aperture size to create that blurry background, and this would separate our subject from the background. It's a lovely effect, and you will see me take photographs by using aperture size later on in this course. But it's a great thing to do. Now, very quickly, you can switch the camera to shutter priority. Perhaps you've seen some movement. It could be someone on a skateboard, somebody jumping on a trampoline, for instance. Anywhere you want to freeze the action. And in both cases, you know that the camera is going to help you get the perfect exposure. All you are going to do is select the correct aperture if you're in aperture priority to achieve that sort of shallow depth of field where the background is blurred. Or shutter priority, where you're going to freeze the action. Somebody on a trampoline, for instance, and you'll freeze them in the air. And it's simply just a matter of jumping between those two modes, knowing that the camera is going to help you out. It's really, really clever. But don't knock, and I'm not knocking manual, because manual is fantastic as well. But I think with manual photography, you need a little bit longer to set your camera up. Either way you do it is really fantastic. Don't worry about it. Anyway, I will see you in the next module.